You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get to this week's guest, a man who spent nearly 20 years of his career in the psychological operations part of the U.S. Army, with an interesting story to tell. Want to remind you guys, of course, to please follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Our Amazon promotion is up. It's live. It's running. So please go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage. It'll redirect you to Amazon. You can do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend. And then, of course, we will donate a percentage of that back to some of the charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the show. Great, easy way to help out veterans charities all across the country just by doing some Amazon shopping. But you got to go to hazardground.com first. As well, continue to leave us Apple reviews, help grow the show, give us a 5-star rating. Certainly appreciate all the love and support that you guys are giving us. So please continue with that. And some of the better reviews we'll try to post on social media as well. But certainly love hearing from you guys, and make sure you keep up with the Apple reviews because it helps grow the show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Forgot to mention that. Please give a thumbs up to all the content there. Smash that like button on all the episodes of the Hazard Ground that you see. It'll certainly help us there as well. No other further. I feel like I keep running through the same announcements, and then always there's something important that I forget, and I do it after the show, and I'm like, darn, I should have mentioned that. But anyway, please feel free to contact us on the website, hazardground.com. We've been getting a lot of guest suggestions as of late, which I love. Certainly want to hear it. Family members reach out because they want to hear their other family member stories without telling them. That's okay. We'll work through it. And I'm pretty good about convincing people to come on the show. So again, hazardground.com, you can go to the contact us page and fill out all the information there. And we'll certainly get your loved ones, family, friends, and whoever else on the show. So we appreciate it. All right. This week's guest spent 26 years in the United States Army, retired as a colonel, and spent the better part of his career inside the psychological operations or PSYOPs area of the U.S. Army. He's got one combat deployment to Baghdad, and the convergence of his personal life and military life lead to a very interesting story. Also has wrote a book called Lessons from the Incline to help people sort of whatever they're struggling with in an inspirational sort of way. I'm excited to hear his story. He is Jamie Efaw joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Jamie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mark.
Full disclosure for everybody, Jamie's another one of my my LinkedIn contacts. LinkedIn, like the military LinkedIn is awesome. Like it really is. When we first started this show years ago, we had to search far and wide, for guests and use other people to give us suggestions and everything else, or other guests to send us names. I've found that LinkedIn, the military community on LinkedIn is very, very deep, and everybody is intertwined. And much like the military, it's crazy how small the community is. So you came across my feed through several other different people, and I started looking up your story and your background, and I thought it was incredibly interesting because I find PSYOPs in and of itself very interesting. But you started your military career at West Point. I should have mentioned that at the beginning. Was that something you always knew you wanted to do?
No, actually. And I would say my decision to go there wasn't primarily based on patriotism. So I grew up in West Virginia, the son of a pastor, 5 kids in the house. We lived at the end of a dirt road. And basically, if I wanted to go to college, I was going to pay for it. And frankly, high school was pretty easy for me. And I wanted a challenge. So those were really the 2 primary things that drove me to West Point were, hey, I want to go to college. It's going to be free. And I want something that's really going to challenge me. And of course, the patriotism came after that. But yeah, it was never a lifelong dream.
What did you know about the military at that point in time? Were any of your family members in or anything like that?
Well, so on my mother's side, she had a brother that was killed in Vietnam who we knew that story, but really nothing much about it. He was a Marine. Her dad was also a Marine, but I didn't really know him. My introduction to West Point was actually my older brother. So he went 4 years before me. Before that, I had never even heard of it. When I saw the Army-Navy game, I thought it was, soldiers in units that played football, right? And so I hadn't heard of the academies. I had heard of West Point, but didn't know what it was. Then he went, I visited him a couple times. I'm like, this looks fun. It wasn't fun, but it looked fun at first.
Yeah, fun, different definitions of fun across the board. So
Yeah.
you had a little bit of an idea what to expect when you got there.
I did.
Did at any point during your freshman year you think you made a bad decision?
No, I think when you do hard things like that and you've made up your mind, I'm the type of person that tries not to second guess, and I do not give myself the option to drop out. And so if I was going to leave, it was going to be because I couldn't hack it. I couldn't make the grade, that type of thing. But I never thought I made a bad decision.
Now, you signed up way early pre 9/11. Like I got in, 2 years before 9/11. So you were in a time of relative peace. Did you just intend to do now? And for those who don't know, West Point is a 5-year service obligation, not a 4. But did you just intend to do your 5 years and then get out and go on with the rest of your life?
Well, I definitely never intended to stay in for 26 years. I mean,
None of us ever do.
it was one of those things where I said, hey, this is pretty fun. I'm having a good time. When it stops being fun, when I stop feeling like I can contribute, I'm going to get out. And as you know, Mark, the military has it very well crafted to kind of string you along, whether it's a promotion or an assignment or a school. And, before I knew it, 20 years had passed, 26 years had passed. I'm like, oh, I guess I'm making this a career.
So you end up branching into the engineer corps,
Right.
and your first unit is at 2ID.
Actually, my first unit was at Bragg.
Was that Bragg? Okay.
So I was a lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne. So my first duty station was out of West Point was Bragg.
Gotcha. I had it backwards. And then you end up for company command at 2ID.
That's right.
Now,
Yeah.
2ID Fort Lewis or 2ID Korea?
Fort Lewis, 3rd Brigade. Right before, while I was there, we were starting to transition to strikers.
Ah, yes, the good old striker brigades.
Yeah.
Yes, those were the days.
And again, that was pre 9/11. And,
Yeah.
A lot of us, both at West Point and our first, our first assignments, we kind of have the idea of, what am I training for? We're never going to go to war. We haven't gone to war. How wrong we were.
Yeah, dead wrong. So, anything of significance that you think happened during those years formatively for you as a leader, as an officer or anything? I don't want to just fast forward too quick through it. I want to get to obviously 9/11 and where you are, but some of those younger years there are so many things that stick out to you that you remember so succinctly and with such clarity that sort of stay with you for the rest of your career.
Well, I think two things at Bragg was, anytime you're in the 82nd or that type of unit, which is a good first unit to be in as a lieutenant, because you really see what excellence looks like. The other thing I would say while I was at Bragg, I met my wife. So that was a good thing. She was a nurse up in Chapel Hill, and all of us lieutenants would go up because you had Duke, you had UNC, and you had NC State. It was a target-rich environment for the weekends for us unmarried lieutenants. And I would say the last thing is, so I did not go to Ranger School prior to my first assignment. I went from Bragg, and there's all kinds of things about Ranger School, but I think completing that course and getting my Ranger tab, that probably went a long way towards me staying in. Just that credibility that you automatically get, and the cohort and the friends you make. And
Did you want to go?
Well, I did not want to go at first.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity at first, but then again, kind of like when I went to West Point, I got to Bragg. And the first unit I was in was not the 82nd. It was a mapping unit. So engineers draw maps. And you can imagine how exciting that was. And so I was like bored out of my mind. I'm like, can I go to Ranger School? And again, it was something I just wanted something hard to do to test myself. And it was hard.
Did you end up recycling at all?
So interestingly, I recycled in the mountain phase. And so that was, I don't know if you remember, but that was when Haiti kicked off.
Yes.
And my unit was deploying to Haiti. My S3 called Ranger School, pulled me out of Ranger School for 2 days because they said they wanted me to deploy. Then they're like, no, never mind. We want you to finish Ranger School. At that time, I had missed too much. I failed knots. I didn't even go to the field, so I recycled mountain phase.
Boy, thanks for that.
Yeah, right. I got to eat a lot of blueberry pancakes.
Well,
that's what mountain phase is famous for.
I suppose there's an upside silver lining to everything, right?
Yeah, right.
Nonetheless. So you end up getting your Ranger tag. Now, where are you on 9/11?
So in 9/11, I am in graduate school. So the Army had selected me, West Point had selected me to come back and teach in their psychology department, or as it's known, behavioral science and leadership. So it's a leadership and psychology department. And so I was back in North Carolina. I was in Chapel Hill. I was driving to class, listening to the radio when the first plane hit the tower. And I don't know how I knew, but I knew immediately that it was a terrorist attack in my heart. I mean, I didn't know, but I knew.
So, okay. So you're going back to school at this point in time.
Right.
Yep. And you're getting your master's degree here because obviously you already have your bachelor's from West Point. And at that point in time is when you choose psychology?
So they choose for you.
The Army chooses for you.
Basically, they're like, hey, you're going to go back and teach psychology. So go get a master's or a doctorate in psychology.
Got it. Okay. So it had nothing to do with PsyOps at the time.
No,
like, you
not
even know
yet.
what PsyOps was at the time.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had some affinity for psychology that you wanted to do it, but West Point decided you were going to be a psychology teacher.
Well, I had majored in psychology at the academy and I had done well, and they kind of earmarked me for coming back if it fit in with the timeline and everything.
Yeah, they looked through your transcripts. Oh, here's a smart guy. We'll bring him back here.
There you go.
The pains of being intelligent. You see what happens? It's like my best friend always told me. He said, when you're dumb, people don't expect things of you. It's true. There is a truth to that. So did you think right with 9/11, like you were going to be diverted and end up going somewhere else? I mean, ultimately, spoiler alert for everybody, you don't end up you end up at West Point, but did you think at the time you would?
Yeah, I think a lot of us did. We all called our, student command and like, hey, either asking, can we go back to a unit? Can we deploy? Of course, no one was deploying yet, right? So this is September, but I would say they kept 95% or higher of the students in their place. They maybe pulled out a couple key personnel because there's also, there's all ranks in school. There's lieutenant colonels. I know of one who did get pulled back to a unit to be an S3. But no, they started, nope, we want you to finish and you're going to go on to your West Point assignment after that. So
now you're teaching psychology at West Point. Are you thinking like, what am I doing? Like I'm wasting my time here kind of deal? Is that how you're feeling?
Not totally. I not that I was wasting my time. I felt more like I was missing out.
Right. Well, that's what
Yeah. I mean,
in reality, the kids you're teaching probably get to combat before you do.
Yeah, in some cases. And and they want to know what's next. And I didn't know. I mean, I couldn't tell them from experience. So, and the other thing that I was realizing is that, I kept in contact with my combat engineer buddies, and I would know what they're doing and know the next job. They're all gearing up for their major's job, which, S3, XO, that type of thing. And I'm thinking, by the time I get back to the field as an engineer ready to be an S3 or XO, I will really been out of the Army for 5 years. Because when you're in graduate school and even when you're West Point, that's not the Army. That's very separate from the Army.
You're wearing civilian clothes every day.
Yeah, at school for sure.
At school, right,
yeah. And so, in the back of my mind, I was also a little worried that, am I going to be able to hack it and contribute and that type of thing after 5 years going into a warfighting unit?
Well, and again, it's that whole sort of iron sharpens iron, right? Like if you're around other soldiers who are training and you're training, everybody gets a little bit better. When you sort of step away from that, your blade becomes a little bit dull and it takes a little of revving up to get back into everyday uniform life. But again, you're teaching at West Point what ends up being 3 years.
Right.
Right. Through about what, 2005, 2006?
Yeah, 2005, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then what happens next when you're done with your West Point tour?
So I got promoted to a major while I was at West Point. And at the time, they had functional areas. I think we still have those. And
Yep.
psychological operations was a functional area at that time. And so I thought to myself, hey, I've been out of engineers for 5 years, but I've been focused on psychology for 5 years. Let me go into that functional area. So I put in for that functional area. I got it. And then shortly after, it became a branch, a very small branch, but it became a branch under special operations. And I got sent back to Bragg. So second tour back at Bragg, went through SWIC, Special Warfare Center. So went through the pipeline for psychology, then spent 6 months studying Arabic. And probably 2 or 3 days after I got out of the pipeline, I deployed to Iraq.
All right, well, let's back so the audience can understand this, because I don't, there's, like you said, it's a very small specialized branch, and there's not a lot of people. I think on the surface, we all can understand psychological operations and what it is.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how much of a departure it is. Like, you're learning psychology. The benefit of psychology in theory is to have information to learn how to help people understand what they're feeling, how they're feeling. It's all for helping. It's all for making people better. For lack of a better way to phrase it, psyops is about manipulation.
Yeah, I would use the word influence, but yeah, manipulation.
Okay, sure. Yeah, again, okay. We'll play nice in the sandbox. Influence.
Sure.
AKA getting people to do things they might not want to do. Okay. All right.
Well, so to be clear, the type of psychology that I specialized in was not like, hey, Mark, sit on the couch and tell me about your mom. It was more of, why do people do what they do? How do people react in group? Almost like marketing. I mean, marketing is psychology, right?
Yes. Okay. So, but now again, so you go through this military course on this, but you're taking things that seem very pure and innocent, and now they're directed in a way that is supposed to have a desired outcome to leverage us on the battlefield, right?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely.
I'm just curious, not that I don't think it would, but like, did any of that was there any moral conundrum in you that you're taking this thing that was used for X and you're sort of using it for Y?
The moral conundrum is not when I would use it in the military. It would be if I were to use it now in the civilian world to help corporations make money.
Okay.
But to achieve Americans' objectives, absolutely not.
Right.
In fact, I wish we could have done more than we were allowed to do.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, it took more authority to get a message released in psychological operations than it would take for a B-1 bomber to drop a bomb.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can imagine, and I'm sure we'll get into this in a moment, but the person making that decision doesn't have the actual background to make that decision, right? Like, they don't have a psychology degree.
Right.
They're just commanders who militarily want an outcome, but
Well, everybody got a little shy with the whole concept. Don't know if you remember, but the strategic corporal, right? Where a corporal could say something on CNN and it affect national policy because information is power, and saying things that reverberate. So people were very, gun shy, if you will, even though we weren't using weapons, on what kind of message and could it be traced back to us. And just from the questions you asked, there's always the tendency of this is a little, brainwashing type stuff. Do we want to be known for that? So people are kind of hesitant to use the full spectrum of our artillery.
And again, well, I can sympathize, because I spent a small portion of my career in the public affairs world, and messaging, it's the same desired effect, right? I mean, it is influencing the media and the public in the public affairs world to have a narrative and a story, whereas you are influencing and, messaging the enemy or other non-combatants on the battlefield to feel and think a certain way about the American mission. So I get it, which is why I kind of knew the answers to the question.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, on my side, I think we do messaging wrong. I don't know the whole lot of PSYOPs and what you guys would go through. I'd love to find out here in a moment, but I would just say again, we are way too defensive in our messaging at times, as opposed to offensive and proactive. But again, that's a completely different conversation. All right, so you end up in Baghdad. What is your PSYOPs mission there? What are you told? What are you on ground to do? And kind of help set the stage a little bit for the context of, because this is what, 2006 when you get there, right?
Yeah, 2006.
So we are just about preceding the surge.
Right. So I was there during
Violence
the
is at its height.
surge. Yeah, it was in the middle of it. Those are the days where, we were seeing double digits, if not triple digits, U.S. deaths daily. Things are not looking good. It's bad news. The surge begins. So I am co-located, attached, if you will. You just talked about the public affairs, to the U.S. Embassy Public Affairs Office. Okay. And I'm leading what is
you're in the green zone, right?
I'm in the green zone. So the old U.S. Embassy was one of Saddam's palaces there in the green zone. And I'm leading what we call a MISS team, a military information support team. So it was me leading, I want to say 4 or 5 other PSYOPers, a translator, 2 translators, and our mission, one, working hand in hand with all information going around, but really at the strategic level. So we're not out there. My team's not out there with combat units, with loudspeakers or dropping leaflets or things like that. We're working at more of a national level, doing billboards or television commercials or national unity concerts or things that are not overtly persuasion or influence, but over time are.
Yeah, I mean, again, I help me understand a little bit of sort of the echelons of this thing when it comes to PSYOPs, because again, you're working at a high strategic level, and in parlance, people not in PSYOPs and even non-military people would understand. Strategically, our goal is to win the war. Operationally, our goal is to hold a certain, area of land or battlefield space. And then tactically, it is to suppress the enemy at the ground level, right? Like those are the 3 levels. It's sort of similar in the PSYOPs world, right? You have a strategic mission operationally, and then tactically how you execute it on the ground. So you're at the strategic level, but what do you hope to affect at the very ground level?
From the strategic level, what do we hope to affect at the ground level?
Right, yeah.
So one of the big things, obviously, sectarian violence was the huge thing. So we were looking for unity within the country. One of our big campaigns was we ran a TIPS hotline. So people would call in if they knew an attack was coming or a roadside bomb or that type of thing. And this was a national wide campaign that, we ran and monitored and manned a hotline. We passed information on to ground units. They would investigate. So things that had on the ground effect, but they were nationwide efforts.
I'll ask this question, even though it's sort of loaded. Did it work? I mean, I know it's hard to judge that, right?
Yeah.
Because as we've said 100 times, sometimes tactical goals and strategic goals don't always mean the same thing. Although they're all supposed to feed into each other up and down, they don't always mean the same thing. You can tactically win a battle and strategically lose a war. So I know it's a tough question to answer, but do your best. Like, just talk through it for me.
I'm not sure anything in Iraq worked.
But again, see, now I will sit here, just in the same vein, I will sit here and tell you tactically a lot of the shit that I did worked.
Yeah,
it did.
Absolutely. So within PSYOP, we had what we call measures of effectiveness and measures of performance.
Okay.
So, and then that's how we would measure what we did. So a measure of performance may be, hey, we had 30 radio commercials, 20 TV spots, and 15 billboards go up. But our measure of effectiveness is how many actual calls came into the call center that resulted in actionable intelligence. And that would vary. And people started gaming. So I'm just using this as a specific example because I think people can relate. People would start gaming the tips line. So while we were hoping to get tips, people would use it for revenge or to call on their neighbor or to get someone from the other sect in trouble rather than what it was really intended for. So again, the law of unintended consequences. So I can't really answer that
I know
definitively. I like to tell myself that I didn't waste my 9 or 10 months over there and that we did good. I know I did my job. Whether or not that job resulted in us doing well on the ground, I don't know. Was
there ever a point where you had conflict with your boss, where your boss said, I want to do this, and you thought, no, that's bad, that's wrong, or that's not the best way to execute what you're asking for, kind of deal? Because again, there's such a subjective amount of room in your area of expertise. I mean, you could have another PsyOps person right there with you. You both could completely disagree on how to effectively message X, Y, and Z, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I don't have this specific example, but where there was conflict. So I kind of operated in a gray zone. So I was operating, officially, I was part of the embassy. But I was also, it's always a problem when you have more than one boss, right? And so there was a general who was running the strategic level information operations influence campaign. And he would often, one, think I worked for him and I didn't. And two, want me to do things that were in line with his plan, but would contradict what my bigger plan and my bigger strategy was. And he never really saw the light on I'm like, just because you outrank me doesn't mean I work for you. And if you need me to do this, you need to talk to the ambassador and get him to do it. So those are more of the conflicts rather than, same situation. We have two different ideas of how it would work.
Can you think of anything that backfired, like any sort of campaign or initiative that you did that backfired?
No, and that's not to say that it didn't happen. I'm sure it did.
Right.
But no, and that would, if I did know, it probably still stand out in my mind.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, again, and some of this stuff is so tough to judge. So I'm just sort of asking questions because I'm genuinely curious how it all unfolded, and when you say there's a lot that went wrong in Iraq, I mean, from a PsyOps perspective, did you get it more right than wrong?
Yeah, I think from a PsyOps perspective, I think, and I was never involved in this, but many of my buddies were. I think at the tactical level is where, we had a lot of on the ground influence, and that's where you have loudspeakers or face-to-face communication, and you're with a combat unit and you're assisting them, and you can see immediately that what you're doing is helping. And so I think that is probably more satisfying and gratifying and more immediate effect. And I think overall, definitely, we were a force multiplier.
Any part of you that wanted to be a combat engineer in Iraq at that time? Wonder what your buddies were doing?
No, but there were a lot of times where I wish I were. So my first assignment was supposed to be, when I was first told I was going over, I was going to be attached to a Delta team. And I was really excited about that.
Yeah.
And then like 2 weeks before I left, they're like, I know what, we're going to send you to the embassy. And this guy from your class, we're sending him there. So I often wish that I had gotten to do that. It sounds sexy, but it's also because I know the guy who did it. It was a lot of fun. And, a lot of cool stuff, lots of cool stories. So, and he came out alive, so that's all good news too. So I would have loved to have done that. The grass is always greener though, right? He ended up taking over my job for me, and it's all good.
Did you ever stop and think, or when you think back now, I guess is a better way to ask it, how much PSYOPs would change from what you were doing then in 06 and 07 to where it is now?
Well, really, it all depends on the environment, right? So if you're actually in on the ground combat, a lot of it doesn't change that much. But I mean, when you think about, stuff that's been in the news, like, hey, Russia is influencing elections and this, that, and the other. I mean, that is essentially influence operations in PSYOP. It's just in a different environment, right? What China does, that's PSYOP. It's in a different environment. So the technology has definitely changed what we can do and the reach and the immediacy of it, and also the span of control. But the principles are still the same.
Sure. How does, when you're doing this at this point in time, does civil affairs like tie into what you're doing? I mean, was that even around then? Like, where was it?
They were around. They I believe they became a branch soon after us as well, and they were at Bragg as well. And people before the split, we were like a joint civil affairs PSYOP. It was like one word, civil affairs PSYOP. And so there are cases where we do stuff together, like the pipeline. When I went through the pipeline and then went through regional studies and Arabic training, half my class was civil affairs. So, yeah.
Yeah. And again, I mean, it's developed so much. I mean, we got to a point specifically where we were asking for females to do civil affairs for engagements and things of that nature because they were necessary on the ground level. Crazily, we thought that might be something we would need, that would all of a sudden we had to have this huge initiative push. It's just, I know the context of it being used is super important to how effective it can be. But on the macro level, we do a lot more of this now, I think, than we ever did before.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think of the civil affairs as the Army's Peace Corps. Right, you go in and you help, you dig wells, you put in electricity, and you're building goodwill for the U.S. Is essentially how that. And so that, when you think about that, that's also influence operations, right? You're trying to influence the population to be receptive to the U.S.'s desires and what they want to do in that area.
Does PSYOPs miss the mark anywhere?
Yeah.
What was that chuckle for?
Oh, there's just so much behind that question that again, it gets back to what I referred to a little bit before, which has to do with authorities and what we're allowed to do and what the approval chain is and that type of thing.
But expound on it then. Like, okay, look, you're out of the Army.
Yeah, and part of the reason I have intentionally ignored what is going on in that community since I got out, just because there is so much potential in psychological operation that hasn't been realized. And I think everybody who has been in psychological operations will agree with that. And I think because of everything that's gone on across the world in information operations and influence operations, we are finally starting to realize the importance of it and bringing it up to the level. We're like the redheaded stepchild of special operations community, but bringing it up to the level of, hey, we are always going to be in the information environment, even when we're not at war. And we need to be prepping that environment and be active in that environment at all times, and how important it is. And it's not just influence operations, it's counter influence operations as well. So being able to counter what everybody else is doing. I mean, I never would have thought, when I first came in, that we would be in terrorist chat rooms trying to counter the conversation within those rooms. I don't know.
That's kind of awesome, I think.
Yeah. So different things like that. Yeah.
Well, that's a nugget I need to hear more about. How do you? I mean,
I'm not sure if that's classified.
okay, then we'll leave it alone.
Let's move on.
Let's move on. Yeah, never mind that man behind the curtain. So that's going to stay with me for a while, though.
Offline.
After you leave Iraq, you end up, as I understand it, I think we talked about your personal life. Is this where it intervenes with you taking command? Okay, what's the story there?
Yeah, so when I came back, my battalion commander called me in and he's like, so as you know, in special operations community, you command as a major, and it's something you need to do in order to get promoted to the next rank. And he came in and he's like, hey, good news. I'm giving you command. You're going to leave in I don't know, it was like another 4 weeks. So I'd be home for a month, deploy again. Well, at the time, my daughter, so I left when my second child, daughter, when she was 4 weeks old, I left. And so I'm back home. She's like a year old. Well, while I was gone, she was having all kinds of medical issues. She was having seizures. No one knew what was wrong with her. The day after I got home, I'm at the hospital with her up at UNC Chapel Hill Children's Hospital. We don't know what's going on. And so, I told my boss, I'm like, listen, I need to figure out what's going on with my daughter.
Right. And
he essentially gave me the choice. He's like, you can stay here. I can make you an assistant S3, or you can deploy and be a company commander. And I chose to stay. And so many people told me how stupid I was. Like, hey, this is going to end your career. You're not going to get promoted. And, who cares, right? It's your kid. And so I decided to stay. And as things happened and turned out, I ended up a few weeks later getting picked up by another battalion commander to be his S3, and then later his XO, which are also what we call branch qualifying positions, so qualifying me to get promoted. And these were both in a unit that supported from the rear, so we're the ones that recorded all the radio broadcast things, did television, all from studios at Fort Bragg in this big studio that we have there. And so I wasn't getting deployed at that time, able to focus on my daughter. Ended up figuring out what's wrong with her. And, today she's a healthy 16-year-old. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, God bless, first of all. That's, that was, I couldn't imagine, I mean, those are tough choices. I mean, it's not a tough choice to make. It's obviously you choose your family first, but, you've dedicated so much of your life to this craft right now that, missing an opportunity like that had to eat a little bit on the inside, to say the least.
Yeah. I mean, that's what you want to do. That's what you train for. And your whole, company commander is like, it's the pinnacle up to that point in your life. You're like,
right.
You're commanding troops in combat overseas. Who would not want to do that?
So what do you end up doing instead?
So I end up going to another battalion. I become the S3. I'm an S3 there for a year. Then I become the XO there for a year. And then it's time for me to PCS. And they send me to Germany.
Okay. Is everything 100% okay with your daughter when they send you to Germany?
Yeah. So this is like 2.5 years later.
Okay.
I had a third kid by then.
Okay.
It's 2009. So I'm going over there to be the PSYOP officer for UCOM, United States European Command. So didn't really know anything about it. It was Germany. Got to take my family. By this time I had a third kid, so we left with him when he was, I think, 6 months old, and in Germany for 3 years.
Okay. So now you're doing. What is PSYOPs in a non-deployed world? I guess is the easiest question I can ask, because it's so targeted towards. I mean, other than pushing teams down range to do it, right, on your own, like I'm sure under your command at that point in time, you sent people down range to do it. But is that all basically that's happening?
No, we were still running influence operations in Europe, actually.
Oh, okay.
So I
Bratwurst
managed.
kielbasa. I mean,
Yeah, there you go. So there was our primary area of focus was the Balkans. We ran a website called Southeast European Times. We started the first influence social media Facebook site. Nobody had done that in the military at the time. We started with 0 people, got it up to 500,000 by the time I left. Interestingly, I was speaking at a conference and we were talking about the penetration we had in Albania. So 1 out of every 3 people in Albania was a reader of our Facebook page.
oh wow.
And the question was, and this is way before, so this is in like 2010, 2011. Like, do you think if you wanted to, that we could have an influence in Albanian politics and elections? And the answer was absolutely. We never obviously, dipped our toe into that realm because that wasn't our job, or, we're not allowed. But, fast forward a few years later and you can see how that technique has been used in, all kinds of situations, American politics, other politics, that type of thing. But I'm proud to say we were kind of at the cutting edge of influence operations with social media. When you think about it, 2008, 2009, social media, Facebook, they were still kind of baby companies.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's you don't realize how fast they've grown because they're such a part of our everyday life. But you're right. I mean, remember Facebook, this is 2009, Facebook's 5 years old.
Right. Yeah.
It's not even that old yet. So I can barely walk, if you will. That said, I mean, you're doing all this cutting edge stuff. Are you at the point where you're feeling like, your military career is endless at this point? You're going to keep going on? Like, are you thinking about, where you want to go next, what you want to do?
So at that point, I'm waiting to see if I get promoted. So I'm a major. Well, am I going to get promoted? If I get promoted and I get a good assignment after that, then, hey, let's see where it takes us. So I was waiting to see if I got promoted. Then I was also waiting to see if I got picked up for an 05 command, okay, both of which happened. So, again, I'm like, okay, let's see where it takes us. And this time it took me to Virginia Beach.
Not a bad place to go.
No, so it was not a PSYOP job. I was basically a post commander at a joint naval base. The Navy was a lead, so it was joint base Little Creek, Fort Story. I had the Fort Story side, but I was deputy commander of the joint base, and that's where I started getting a lot more interactions with the naval special warfare community. They would do a lot of training and had training facilities at several of the teams are at Little Creek, Dam Neck, and they would do training at Fort Story. So I think the Army had intentionally kept special operations officers in that billet just because of that interaction.
Right. Makes sense. Because of the joint interaction, because so much of special ops it's all joint. There's none of them operate, or I should say very few of them operate independently, but again, neither here. And even if they did operate as one branch, they're so specialized that they would need regular Army support anyway. So it's joint in every size, way, shape, or form. Yeah. All right. So you stay there for a couple of years. You got to be at around the 20-year mark at this point in time, right?
Let's see. Yeah, I am. I think I hit 20 years. Yeah, so 2013, I hit 20 years, and I was at at that point, I think I'm staying in, right?
Yeah, you've certainly committed to it. There's no doubt about that. And then you end up back in PSYOPs as a branch chief, which again, go ahead.
The job that nobody ever wants or asks for, right, is to be the assignment officer for your branch. So that's at what we call our Human Resources Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky, beautiful Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I'm there for a couple of years, get told I'm going there. I got promoted to 06 while I was there, so that was a good thing. And it was actually, I did not want to go, but it was actually a very interesting assignment just to see how the assignment process worked and both the diligence behind it, but sometimes the arbitrariness behind it, to see how the promotion system worked, to see the interaction with Congress and Department of the Army and just the politics that are involved. It really was a peek behind the curtain. And
is the underbelly as dirty as it feels?
No, I don't think it's as dirty as it feels. I think everybody really has good intentions. But it can get political. I mean, there is definitely politicalness, and there's definitely, there is something to be said for who you know and who advocates for you. And, I could have an assignment all lined up, but if someone of a certain rank says, I want Johnny, and my boss tells me, give him Johnny, he gets Johnny.
Yeah.
And that's assignments. Promotions are, to me, I think promotions are one of the things that we do best. And I think we're even doing it better as far as fairness and equality and that type of thing. It's a very, even though it's true that the board spends like 5 seconds looking at your file, probably more than that, but it is a fair process.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. It gives me a little bit of faith left. That said, again, I use the phrase often that I need better friends. I need,
Yeah.
I need friends of Johnny who kind of, want that. I've never had that. I don't think anybody's ever said I want Mark, but that's more my problem than yours. Now, again, you have to end up turning down command for a second time.
Yeah. So what happened while I was at Fort Knox, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And, at first it was just, do some chemo, do some treatment, blah, 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 she'll be fine. But then it came back again while we were at Knox. And this time it had spread throughout her body. She was stage 4. It was in her spine, in her lumbar, and she denied conventional treatment. She's like, I am not going to do this. She had done a chemo, her hair came out, and she's very athletic, walks every morning. The couple of days after the chemo, we were out trying to walk. She couldn't even walk a block. It had knocked her out so bad. She's like, I am not going to do this. She's like, this chemo will kill me before the cancer will. And so she went down the rabbit hole of alternative treatments. She figured out stuff with diet, stuff with supplements. She went to Mexico for 4 weeks. And so her numbers, her cancer markers should be below 36, right? And when she went to Mexico, they were at, I want to say 109. When she came back, they were at 12. She was in total remission.
Montezuma's Revenge in Mexico? Is that how you do it? Just drink the water?
So there are all kinds of effective and alternative treatments that cannot be in Mexico, right across from the border in Rosarita, that cannot be offered in the U.S.
Those federal drug administrators, you guys.
Yeah, big pharma, insurance. I won't go on that soapbox, but so she got herself in remission. We came out to Colorado Springs, and then I found out I had been selected for 06 Command. And the command was a command in Qatar for the Combined Joint Information Support Team.
They just can't seem to give you a command like in any place normal, can they?
No, I mean, if they had given me a command to brag, or if they had given me, a garrison command, I probably would have taken it. But weighing what was going on. So hold
on a second. Weren't you the friend I was talking about before? Like, couldn't you have just called back to branch and go, I want this? And one of your friends said, okay, we'll give you this.
Well, you can do that a little bit within like assignments, but when it comes to command is something that gets approved by Congress, right? And yeah, I mean,
it ain't like that on the guard side, for the record. That's just the active duty.
yeah. So yeah, so when you are stage 4 cancer, you never don't have cancer, basically.
Right.
And I have 3 kids still at home, and I even went over there. My buddy was in command at the time. I was going to do the rip tow with him. Went over there, saw it, looked great, looked fun. But I asked, I'm like, hey, if I go, can I come back to Colorado Springs? And they're like, no, you'll be either at DC, Tampa, or Bragg. And, I'm at like 24, 25 years in. I'm like, I kind of like it here in Colorado Springs. And my kids are growing up, and my wife, she's still struggling with stuff. So I declined command. And at that point, you're not just declining command, you're basically saying you're ready to get out. So I was ready to get out. I could have stayed in. I could have done 30. I could have probably done 30 here in the Springs. I was at Sauk North at the time, but they say when you'll know, and I knew. So, yeah, declined command for a second time and decided to get out.
Okay. So then do you know what you want to do at this point in time?
No, I have no clue.
So where do you land?
So I know I don't want to, push the easy button and become a GS. I know I don't want to become a government contractor and work for Lockheed Martin, and, God bless those people that do that. But I just wanted to do something totally different, but I didn't know what that was. Okay. And so I really just, I found a transition program called the Commit Foundation, which they focus really on special operators and people that have been in a career. And they really helped me look at, what do I want my life to look like after the military? And when you've been doing one thing your whole adult life, you really don't even know what's out there anymore. It's just a lack of information. And so I spent a year in Colorado Springs just exploring what's out there, what's possible. I looked into business, I looked into finance, I looked into teaching. But I ended up where I work now, which is at a Christian nonprofit that's headquartered here in Colorado Springs. I do that as pretty much my full-time job. And then I actually was picked up as a coach with the foundation that had helped me transition, the Commit Foundation, and I coach with them, and I've been coaching with them for 3 years. And
the nonprofit you work for is called Young Life, correct?
Yes, Young Life. We're an international. We're in 105 different countries. A parachurch, I think they refer to us, nonprofit organization.
And I mean, and the goal is to what? Just focus on kids?
So the mission statement is introducing adolescents to Jesus Christ and helping them grow in their faith. So I would say it's a Christian version of Boys and Girls Club.
Makes sense.
It's a big organization. We have all kinds of different ministries. One of the things that attracted me to it is there's also a military component to it. So we have military community youth ministry, which is, they refer to it as Club Beyond. And so they'll have this organization on post all around the world for military kids. And the other thing that was really cool is that in the summers they run family camps, which are free for military members. There's they do one in Texas, 2 here in Colorado Springs, and I think 1 for the folks out of Fort Lewis. They're really giving families, especially where the service member is recently deployed, a free week together, away from everything, to reconnect, get to know each other, spend good family time. I got to do it with my family. It's just an awesome experience.
What do you miss the most about the military?
That's a good question. I think I miss the community. And a lot of people say camaraderie. I think it's more than that. It's the whole community. It's the whole, it's not just the people that I worked with, it's the families and the sense of one purpose. And, several times we lived on post and how that feels. So I think the military community is the thing I miss the most.
We've talked a little bit about this, but how much are you still in touch with people in the PsyOps community and the direction of where it's going and things of that nature?
So people that were around my cohort and my year group, I still keep in contact pretty much, but like me, most of them are now starting to get out or finishing up command. And so I'm not that in touch anymore with that community at all.
At the risk of diving into the pool, we shouldn't. But I only ask just because of your background. Given how the military has been sort of thrust into the political sphere more than any of us ever wanted to, in a certain sense, I feel like we're almost waging a psychological campaign against ourselves and trying to right the ship. And I know I would 100% assume there's the desire to remove us from the political spectrum. I don't know that there's the appetite for people to put their careers on the line to do so, though. And I think that's a big problem.
Yeah, I think it's a huge problem. And I can only hope that the people that, the 05s and 06 who are in right now and it's making them sick, that when they get to those ranks, they'll change it. And I mean, it has to come from the top. It has to be a refusal. We can't pander to, we have to remember we don't serve and defend a political party or a president. We support and defend a constitution. We are the only country that defends ideas.
Yeah. That's, an incredible way to put it. How would you say PsyOps and psychological operations have changed to the point where how much of the battlefield consideration are they for any infantry battalion commander or brigade commander? I know at a division level it happens all the time. At least the conversations are there, but how much? Here's a better way to phrase it: how much closer from the strategic level does it need to be to the tactical level for psychological operations to maybe have a greater effect?
Yeah, I think it needs to always be a consideration. I think that all the way to the battalion level, if you have someone advising on the planning team, operational, depending on what the mission is, actual PsyOp troops attached to you, it's critical from, I'd say battalion level all the way up.
You wrote a book.
Yeah, kind of.
Lessons from the Incline. And this is actually done with one of your Ranger buddies, right?
Yeah. So one of my Ranger buddies and classmates, who was also here in Colorado Springs, we were getting together and, we're both kind of getting older and fat. And we wanted to challenge ourselves. And here in Colorado Springs, if your listeners who have ever been here, there's a place called the Manitou Incline, and it's a little less than a mile long. It's a set of railroad tie stairs that used to be a funicular railroad. And under in a little less than a mile, it gains over about 2,000 feet in elevation.
Wow.
And so they tell you at the bottom the plan.
Like walking up a wall at that point.
Yeah. There are places where it's like 65-degree incline. And they tell you at the bottom, for tourists probably who come, plan 2 hours to get to the top. And so my buddy and I were like, hey, let's do this thing. Let's try to get it under 30 minutes. And to do that, we said, let's meet every Thursday morning at 6:00 and just, push ourselves. So he and I started doing that. I want to say it was in 2020. So this was during the COVID crisis. Mm-hmm. And we just started meeting every morning all throughout the year. We did it for a whole year. We're still doing it. We did it yesterday. He and I did it yesterday. And as I was as I was climbing, I would never wear headphones. We would talk sometimes, but we'd also get separated. And I do my best thinking when I'm outside, when I'm doing some type of physical activity. And I just started thinking about the metaphor of climbing stairs and achieving hard things or setting goals. And I started thinking about these different lessons that could be learned on each trip that we took. And after a while, I started going back and I would just type them into my computer and stuff. And they sat there for like a year. I just did it for myself, right? And then earlier last year around Christmas time, I said, I'm going to put some of these on LinkedIn. And so I started putting like one a day on LinkedIn. And then people are like, hey, are these all in a blog somewhere? Do you have a book or something? And I'm like, no, I don't. And they say, can you? And I'm like, I don't know if I can or not. But, the great thing about technology and Amazon, I never intended to write a book. So I didn't want to like get a publisher or get an editor or all that thing. I was just going to put it together for people that wanted to read it. So I did the self-publishing thing on Amazon. I put it out. It's a short book. People can read it in one sitting if they want, but I've had other people who are like, hey, I really love reading like one lesson a day over a 20-day period. So there's 20 lessons that usually come with a story. I've also associated them with usually a principle or Bible verse from the Bible. And there's questions at the end. So like self-reflection questions that you can ask and, improve yourself on. So
is there any psyops in your book?
Oh, it's all psyop.
Kind of figured, right? I mean, I kind of figured this was, but again, this is not manipulation. This is influence.
Yeah. And influence is not bad, right?
No, I mean, it's especially when it's all positive, Yeah.
I save manipulation for a workplace here,
and your marriage. No, I kid. Don't do that.
But kind of not, right?
No, yeah. I mean, I think in your case, you're probably better well equipped to know when you're trying to be manipulated than necessarily being the manipulator. So, I would use that edge to your advantage. I mean, do you find yourself still using psyops in everyday life?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I know how my actions and others influence people. And a lot of times, I jest, but I do, it's easy to know pressure points of like my colleagues at work, and they're all civilian. I mean, I'm a civilian too, but they all know where I'm coming from. And so they'll be like, you're messing with me, aren't you? I'm like, yeah, I am. So, but yeah, it's.
Do the kids know? They're like, Dad, don't try that psychology stuff on me.
Oh yeah, for sure.
That's when you have to Jedi mind trick them,
Yes. These are not the droids you're looking for.
Exactly. Yeah. So you got Young Life, you got the book. I mean, settling in. Look, I mean, you look back on the 26 plus years, a lot accomplished. I know you feel like there's not, because we talked, you and I, before we started. But, the depth of what you did for a better part of your career is that there's a lot there. And there's a lot to uncover. And I think that, just understanding the nature of psychological operations means that there's a lot of it's not something you can fit in a thimble. It's deep.
Yeah. And one thing, Mark, that I was talking with a friend the other day is that you don't know all the weight that you're carrying when you're still on active duty. And I related it to, when you're doing a ruck march, like, one of those, I don't know if they still do them, but, like 20-mile ruck marches that you have to do in a certain amount of time. And when you first put on that ruck, it's really heavy. But by the end, although it's still heavy, you almost don't notice it's there until you take it off. And when you take it off, you're like, wow, I was carrying a lot of weight. That was really heavy. And for me, that's what it's been like with retirement, is when I retired, I'm like, wow, I have really been carrying a lot of weight. And it was almost liberating to be able to set aside that rucksack and let the next generation carry it.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, it's something I'm struggling with now as I'm facing, the 18th tee box of my military career, right? It's hard to know. You don't want to put the weight down because you've been carrying it for so long.
Yeah.
You don't know what life is without the weight.
Well, and sometimes you do miss the weight, and which is why you set artificial challenges like climbing the incline every week.
Yeah. Yeah. You need something to push you. I do want to ask you this, just given your psychology background, in reference to mental health and PTSD. And I'm sure you've come across it with several of your fellow, classmates that you knew all the way back from West Point or whatever. But I mean, psychologically, are we better equipped now as a military to handle this challenge? I in reality, we're not at war. Again, air quote, not at war anymore. So there's a whole generation of us from the global war on terror who dealt with the folks who are still in combat now were those who work in the clandestine operations world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just caveating all this by saying there's a whole generation of young people who will go through their military careers acknowledging PTSD exists, recognizing that, you can get it and you can catch it as easily as you caught COVID or whatever else. But we're also dealing with a military that's a lot more empathetic and understanding of it now, whereas that wasn't the case for our generation. Right. So, but the military still has a long way to go in understanding the depth of this problem and how to solve it. So, just sort of open comment, I don't really know if there's a direct question, but, how in your background in psychology, how do you know, how would you grade where the military is and where they should go?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's a really hard question. I'm not sure it's the military's job. I think it's our job. My job, your job, other people that are getting out. I got a buddy here in Colorado Springs who just set up, you might have seen it on LinkedIn, call sign 2022. After the, 22 people a day, military, are committing suicide. In my West Point class, our biggest cause of death of our classmates is not combat, it's suicide. And I think it's kind of stuff that Greg's doing and being able to call people, ask them how they're doing, helping them get purpose, helping them get the help they need, letting them know that people care. The military is an institution, but it's made up of people. And I think it's the people that need to help the ones that are suffering. I myself, I've suffered with depression, off and on. And I wrote about it the other day on LinkedIn. I hid it. My wife didn't even know about it, right? And part of that, I think, is getting over the stigma of it's okay to ask for help, and not only ask for help, to accept help when it's offered.
Yeah, again, it's I've said this several times as I've shared a little bit of my personal story, whether it's been 5 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, whatever it is, unpack the box, man. Figure out what's going on inside of you, unpack the box, sit down and go through it. There's a lot more in that box than you think there is.
Yeah.
You talk about letting go of the weight. Yeah, the weight goes away. And that's the weight you do want to get rid of. You don't mind the responsibility of being a leader. You don't mind the weight of the responsibility of taking care of other people. That's sort of inherent in the way we're cut and how we're made in the military. But getting the weight off your shoulders of the one that's eating your life from the inside out is the one you need to do. So, listen. It's perfectly well said. And yeah, the buddy system is certainly part of it. Always pick up the phone, call a friend, check in on somebody, shoot them a Facebook message or LinkedIn, whatever. Hey, just checking in. You want to know you're okay. Those things go a long way. They go a very long way, and I think everybody benefits from them. And I think it's the least we could do it to say, given everything else that's in front of us.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, look, again, the book is called Lessons from the Incline. Again, Young Life is the organization if you guys want to get involved and help out. And it's a nationwide organization, correct?
Yes, actually international.
So ways to help out overall. Best of luck to your wife. Please continued health and success. Whatever she got in Mexico, tell her to send it along to the rest of us. Seems like it's pretty good, but I went down to Mexico for different reasons, and I came back with something totally different.
Yeah, that you need medication for.
It's penicillin, but neither here nor there. Listen, it's been great getting to talk to you. I'm glad we finally connected. I'm glad that you did this. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I hope that your family and friends will listen to this and gain a little bit of a deeper appreciation for you and what you've done, because I can tell you when we chatted, there was much more there than you thought there was.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Mark. I did enjoy it. Appreciate it. And thanks for what you're doing on this show.
Certainly appreciate it. Jamie Efaw, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
All right. Take care.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zinno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.